Before the gold towers, before the billion-dollar brand, before the name Trump became one of the most famous and controversial in modern history, there was a man few people truly knew. A man who never sought cameras, never craved fame, never ran for office. But without him, there would be no Trump empire. This is the story of Fred Trump, the quiet architect of one of America's most powerful real estate dynasties. A story of ambition, discipline, controversy, resilience, and the hidden roots of one of the most influential families in the world. This is not the story of a president. This is the story of the man who built the foundation beneath him. Fred Christ Trump was born on October 11, 1905, in the Bronx, New York City, the son of German immigrants. His father, Friedrich Trump, had arrived in America during the late 19th century seeking opportunity, like millions of others. Friedrich found success running restaurants and boarding houses during the Klondike Gold Rush before settling in New York, where he married Elizabeth Christ and started a family. But Fred's childhood was marked by tragedy. In 1918, when Fred was only 13 years old, his father died suddenly during the influenza pandemic. Overnight, the family lost its provider, and young Fred became the man of the house. There was no inheritance of luxury, no safety net of wealth, only responsibility. Fred dropped out of high school to support his mother and siblings, and it was during these teenage years that something powerful began to form inside him, a belief that survival depended on discipline, planning, and relentless work. Elizabeth Trump, Fred's mother, was resourceful and business-minded. She had inherited her husband's properties and knew the value of real estate. Together, mother and son began managing rental homes in Queens and Brooklyn. Modest houses, working-class neighborhoods, small profits. But Fred didn't just manage property. He studied it. He observed how neighborhoods grew, how families moved, how mortgages worked, how banks thought, how cities expanded. While other teenagers were chasing dreams, Fred Trump was chasing blueprints. By the early 1920s, he was building houses himself, literally swinging hammers, supervising crews, and learning construction from the ground up. He was not born into wealth. He built it, brick by brick. In 1923, at just 18 years old, Fred Trump officially founded Elizabeth Trump & Son, naming the company after his mother, a move that reflected both respect and strategy. At the time, women were viewed more favorably in certain business transactions, and Fred understood perception mattered. From the beginning, his vision was clear. Not luxury, not skyscrapers, but housing for ordinary Americans. Fred Trump focused on building affordable homes for working-class families, especially returning veterans and middle-income workers. His strategy was simple but brilliant. Mass production of housing, efficient construction, predictable financing, and long-term rental income. He wasn't trying to build landmarks, he was trying to build systems, and systems scale. During the Great Depression, while many developers collapsed, Fred Trump survived, and in many cases thrived. He understood government programs, loan guarantees, and how to work with public financing when private money disappeared. And when the war ended, everything changed. America entered the largest housing boom in history. Millions of soldiers returned home. Families expanded. Cities grew outward. Suburbs exploded. And Fred Trump was ready. He became one of the most prolific builders of middle-class housing in New York City, especially in Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. His developments were massive, clean, and uniform. Rows of apartment buildings, garden-style complexes, and low-rise communities that housed tens of thousands of Americans. Among his most famous projects, Beach Haven Apartments in Brooklyn, Trump Village in Coney Island, Shore Haven in Bensonhurst, Park Briar in Jama Estates. By the 1950s, Fred Trump was no longer just a builder, he was a housing empire. At his peak, he owned over 27,000 apartments, making him one of the largest private landlords in New York State. But Fred Trump was not flashy. He didn't build skyscrapers, he didn't chase headlines, he didn't host galas. He wore simple suits, drove modest cars, worked long hours, kept meticulous records. His office culture was rigid and disciplined. Employees were expected to be punctual, precise, and efficient. Waste was unacceptable. Excess was discouraged. Every dollar mattered. Fred Trump believed money was not meant to impress, it was meant to multiply. And he taught that belief to his children. In 1936, Fred married Mary Ann MacLeod, a Scottish immigrant who had arrived in New York from the Isle of Lewis. She worked as a domestic servant before meeting Fred. Their marriage produced 5 children: Mary Ann, Fred Jr., Elizabeth, Donald, and Robert. Donald Trump was born on June 14, 1946, in Queens, New York, into a household shaped by structure, ambition, and expectations. Fred Trump was not a warm or sentimental father. He was demanding. He believed children should be tough, competitive, driven, self-reliant. He valued strength and success and viewed weakness as failure. From a young age, Donald was groomed for business. Fred took him to construction sites, showed him blueprints, introduced him to bankers, and taught him how deals worked, not in classrooms, but in real life. But Fred Trump also believed in control. He wanted his children disciplined, not rebellious. When Donald became restless and aggressive in school, Fred sent him to the New York Military Academy, believing military structure would shape his character. And it did. Donald emerged more confident, competitive, and assertive, traits that would later define his public persona. Meanwhile, Fred's eldest son, Fred Trump Jr., struggled under his father's expectations. Unlike Donald, Fred Jr. wanted to be a pilot, not a businessman. Fred Trump viewed this as weakness, and their relationship deteriorated. Fred Jr. ultimately left the family business, battled alcoholism, and died in 1981 at just 42 years old, a tragedy that deeply affected the family, including Donald, who later credited this loss with shaping his views on addiction. But through success and tragedy, Fred Trump's business machine kept growing. By the 1960s and 1970s, he was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, quietly controlling enormous swaths of New York real estate. But Fred Trump's empire was not without controversy. In 1954, the U.S. Justice Department investigated Fred Trump for alleged profiteering in government-backed housing projects. Prosecutors accused him of inflating construction costs to extract excess profits from federally insured loans. Though no criminal charges were filed, the investigation damaged his reputation and highlighted how aggressively he exploited government programs. Then, in the 1970s, Fred Trump and his company were sued by the U.S. government for housing discrimination, accused of refusing to rent apartments to black tenants. Federal investigators alleged that Trump-owned properties marked applications from black renters with codes to reject them. The Trumps denied wrongdoing, but the case ended in a consent decree requiring the company to change its practices without admitting guilt. These controversies revealed another side of Fred Trump, a man willing to push legal boundaries, a man who believed business was war, a man who played aggressively, sometimes too aggressively. Yet, despite criticism, Fred Trump remained a master of financial strategy. He understood leverage, he understood debt, he understood tax shelters, he understood depreciation, he understood how to protect wealth. and he understood one truth above all. Real estate doesn't just generate income, it generates power. By the late 1970s, Fred Trump began transitioning the business to his son Donald. He gave Donald management roles, property oversight, and access to financing networks. But more importantly, he gave him credibility. In real estate, reputation matters, and Fred Trump's name opened doors. Banks trusted him, contractors respected him, city officials knew him, investors followed him. Donald Trump inherited not just assets, but infrastructure. In 1971, Donald officially took control of Elizabeth Trump and Son, later renaming it the Trump Organization. But Fred continued advising behind the scenes, shaping decisions, approving deals, and financing projects. One of Donald's earliest major moves, the redevelopment of the Commodore Hotel near Grand Central Station, was backed by Fred's financial support and relationships. Without Fred, the deal may never have happened. And it worked. Donald Trump became famous for skyscrapers. Fred Trump built the ground beneath them. Behind closed doors, Fred also provided Donald with massive financial support through loans, guarantees, property transfers, and strategic tax structures. Decades later, investigative reporting revealed that Donald Trump received hundreds of millions of dollars from his father over his lifetime, much of it shielded from taxes using legal loopholes and family trusts. But in Fred Trump's mind, this wasn't favoritism, it was legacy. He believed wealth existed to be preserved, protected, and passed forward, not squandered. And Donald, in many ways, embodied his father's philosophy, amplified. Fred Trump valued discipline. Donald valued dominance. Fred valued control. Donald valued visibility. Fred built quietly. Donald built loudly. But both shared the same core belief. Business is power, and power belongs to those bold enough to take it. As Fred aged, he gradually retreated from daily operations. His health declined, and by the 1980s, he suffered from Alzheimer's disease. Donald increasingly took center stage, expanding the Trump brand into Manhattan skyscrapers, casinos, hotels, resorts, and global licensing deals. Yet Fred Trump's influence never disappeared. It lived in Donald's deal-making style, in his competitive instincts, in his obsession with winning, in his refusal to admit defeat, in his belief that success was proof of superiority. Fred Trump died on June 25, 1999, at the age of 93, leaving behind a real estate empire worth billions, thousands of properties, and a family legacy that would reshape American politics, media, and culture. He never ran for office. He never appeared on reality television. He never sought the spotlight. Yet through his son, his name became one of the most recognized in the world. But the true story of Fred Trump is more complex than success alone. He was a builder of homes, but also a symbol of aggressive capitalism, a family patriarch, but also a demanding father, a disciplined businessman, but also a controversial operator, a man of order, but also a man of sharp edges. He built opportunity, and he guarded it fiercely. He believed America rewarded strength and punished weakness. He believed wealth was survival. He believed legacy was everything. And perhaps his greatest creation wasn't an apartment complex or housing development. It was a mindset, a worldview, a philosophy, one that would echo decades later from boardrooms to television studios, from business towers to political rallies, from real estate deals to the presidency itself. Because long before Donald Trump stood behind a podium, Fred Trump stood behind him. And without Fred Trump, there is no Trump story. Fred Trump's story reminds us that history is not built only by those who stand in front of cameras, but by those who lay foundations in silence. Men and women whose decisions ripple through generations, shaping families, fortunes, and even nations. Behind every empire stands an architect. Behind every legacy stands a blueprint. And sometimes the most powerful figures are the ones history almost forgets. If you believe stories like this matter, stories of power, people, empires, brands, and the forces that shape our world, then you're in the right place. Welcome to Explainary, where we don't just tell stories, we explain how history was built. Subscribe, like, and turn on notifications for more powerful documentaries every week. See you in the next story.